Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2. Today I want to make another update video for the Spark build. I will also be updating the planner in the description, but I have changed a few things around, and also there's a lot of little things that you can do to drastically increase the power of the build, but they don't all warrant their own video, so I figured I would just slam them all into this. So there will be timestamps for everything. I'm just going to showcase what I have changed, some things that are going to help your survivability as well as your damage output, and just some other thoughts that I have about the build after playing with it for a few more days and making a few more optimizations. Also, patch notes got released yesterday, which is going to may or may not change the build a little bit, so figured I would just quickly give you guys an update on, hey, are the patch notes going to affect us and in what ways? The patch is not out yet, but it will be pretty soon, I hope. So figured I would just make a real quick video for you guys to just go over a few things, and a full in-depth build video will probably be within the next few days, as I'm getting pretty happy with the build overall and pretty firm on a lot of my takes in regards to the build. Today's video is sponsored by Hero Wars, an epic free-to-play online idle RPG fantasy game where you can build your ultimate team, take on challenging battles, and explore the vast realm of Dominion. Now the game is even more epic as the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are now available. Thanks to a groundbreaking collaboration between Paramount Pictures and Nexters, Donatello, Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raphael are joining Hero Wars from December 2nd to December 21st. You can take part in a special TMNT event filled with tons of unique missions and rewards. You can even add the turtles right into your team entirely for free. Not to mention there's some limited time Shredder and Casey Jones skins, which I might say look pretty sick, along with heaps of other rewards. This event is packed with a ton of opportunities to make your unique squad extremely powerful and take part in a one-of-a-time collaboration event. If you want to check it out, you better act fast as time is running out and this is a limited time event, so the turtles will only be available for a bit longer. Make sure to download by using my link in the description or scanning the QR code and play the way that you want, either on iOS, Android, or just right in your browser. Again, download using my link and start your Hero Wars journey today. A quick update on my FPS issues. If you've been able to see any of the gameplay, it has not improved. I've tried like literally a million things. Thank you guys for all of your recommendations in the comments. I decided to just order a 9800X 3D, and I had to get new RAM and a new motherboard, so that comes pretty soon. Hopefully that solves the issues. So that's where I am at with that. Also, a ton of you guys have been messaging me in-game because I guess I showed my name or something. And I've been getting inundated with hundreds of messages asking about people's builds and stuff, and it's gotten to a point where I'm kind of just responding too much. So if you have questions, I would leave it down in the comments and I can try to answer, or other people can try to answer. Or if you want help, you can message me, but pay me some exalters or a divine or something, because at this point I'm getting inundated with too many messages. All right, first thing to go over is the patch notes and is it going to change our build. I'm not going to go over all of this. You guys can watch another video if you're interested in that. There's a couple of things that are going to affect us, and they are fairly minor. The first one being there's going to be a new lightning damage and electrocute cluster to the passive tree. It is possible that there is something in here that might be worth anointing on your amulet. It is unsure what this actually means, but it's probably too far in the passive tree for us to actually path down there, but maybe there's a good node in there that is worth anointing. Another thing that is potentially helpful is that the Fire, Lightning Exposure, and Cold Exposure support gems no longer penalize the damage of supported skills. This might help with our Orb of Lightning applying exposure, or Orb of Storms applying exposure a little bit more consistently, as it will shock more as a result of it doing a bit more damage. A very, very slight nerf to the build is that Electrocute is now 25% harder to build up, so with our Kotoko's gloves we won't electrocute as quickly, but this almost instantly electrocutes enemies anyways, and I almost see this as a buff because sometimes I electrocute mobs off screen as I'm just clearing, and then by the time that I get to like an elite, the electrocute might actually be falling off if they were like off screen and instantly got electrocuted. So kind of a nerf, kind of a buff. I'm fine with the change. I don't really see much of a difference. In terms of like damage nerfs, we didn't get hit with anything. A lot of people suspected that we might get hit with like an Archmage nerf or something. Right now, there's no nerfs and pretty much nothing that will affect the build. One thing that is straight up just a buff to literally every build in the game is, let me Control F resistances. So right now, maps inherently have a resistance penalty at tier 6 and tier 11. So I'll just quickly demonstrate how this works. So right now you can see that my resistances are uncapped, but if I go to the map device, I'll go to some random crappy map, and I'll slam in a tier 3 map, Traverse. As you can see, now that I'm in the map, my resistances are crazy. So this is basically going to mean that it's going to be a lot easier to gear, so you don't have to rely as much on resistances. For example, I have prismatic rings, and without them, my resistances are pretty crappy. Also, for a while, I was spec'd into this right here in the Ascendancy tree to give me some more all-res, and this node up here, where these two things were, this one I would say is pretty mandatory, but that one down below did help supplementarily. For whatever reason, you can't see it in my hideout because I guess I have gone up to that tier of map, but basically this is what my resistances are going to look like once the patch actually hits. So I'm going to be able to lose a lot of resistance on my gear, particularly like my chest piece. It'll be significantly easier for me to replace certain items because I won't need as much resistances. That's pretty much all the patch is going to do. It's pretty much just buffing us and not nerfing us at all. So haters get owned. A lot of people thought the build was going to get nerfed, and it's perfectly fine, at least for the time being. Alright, I got a little notepad of things that I want to cover. So in my last video, I got literally 1,000 comments asking about Spark DPS. Why is my number higher than your number? There's a couple things to go over. And keep in mind, I'm going to be very thorough with all this crap, so just if something doesn't interest you, just look at the timestamps down below. So there's a lot of things that influence this number, and there's also a lot of things that don't influence this number but are still a damage increase. One thing that does influence this number, and is probably the difference between my Spark and your Spark, is one, mine is level 25, 19 levels of that are from a skill gem. You can buy a level 19 skill gem for 1 Exalt, so if you don't have that, go do that. Another thing is that my Spark is qualitied. Getting it qualitied, I don't know if it increases the DPS, but it gives you another 4 projectiles, which is pretty insane. Also, my Archmage is level 16. I believe there's a breakpoint to increase the damage from Archmage, but currently it's like not working, or the tooltip isn't working or something. I'll update you guys on that if I ever figure that out. But right now my Archmage is level 16, but it's also qualitied. You can quality things by using Gem Cutter's Prisms, by the way, and you can buy these for very cheap. Go to the currency exchange. I have Exalted Orbs. I want, I'm blind to Gem Cutter's Prisms. 1.5 Exalted Orb is a Gem Cutter's Prism. You just slam a couple of those into Archmage, and just by that, with a few Gem Cutters, it makes the increase of damage go from 6% at level 16 to 8% total. And based on how much mana you have, that's going to drastically increase the amount of damage that you're getting from your Archmage. Also, if your mana is worse than mine, the value that you're getting out of Archmage is also going to be worse. Okay, another thing. Certain skill points are going to affect this number more than others, and there are sorts of damage in this game that are conditional, and there's damage that's just straight up just going to inflate this number. One thing that inflates the ever-living crap out of the Spark DPS number is going to be attack speed. So right now I have 9% attack speed with these nodes in. So if I go to refund passives, I get rid of them, my number right now is at 22,074. It just went down by a whole 2,000. And that's only 9% increased attack speed. I don't even think that that is like true. I'm pretty sure that calculation is just straight up wrong, because 9% increased attack speed makes my Spark go from a 0.28 second cast time to a 0.27 second cast time. So for it to get a whole 10% increase of damage there, I don't know that that is actually mathematically sound. I'd have to think about that a little bit more. But you'll also see that this node right here is a conditional node, giving you 40% increased damage if you've dealt a critical hit recently. Something like this, or something like these nodes down here, 12% increased damage with hits against enemies affected by elemental ailments. These nodes are pretty good nodes, but they are not going to be active, or they're not going to be represented in this number right here because they are conditional. But you're going to have, like this one, 12% increased damage anytime that you just apply shock to an enemy. That's going to be active pretty much all the time. Also, nodes like Duration are not going to increase the number here, but they are going to increase the overall damage, because Duration just makes the Sparks last longer on the ground, which is very, very good for bossing. You can see I removed the Duration node there, 20% duration, but this number didn't move at all. The same can be said for shock magnitude, lightning exposure. Anything that is conditional is not going to make this number go up. While we are on the topic of Spark and skill gems, one thing I would recommend right now is that this gem, Rising Tempest, seems to be bugged. It's supposed to give you 12% increased damage for each different elemental type that you use. Possible that this gets patched, but the reason that this is good right now is that even if you use 2 lightning skills, so I'll use Spark right here, you can see the number went up, but then I'll use Orb of Storms. I didn't use a different elemental type, but this just went up twice, and it went up by 24% increased damage. But this works for any spell that you use. So if I use Surge of Power, Flame Wall, Orb of Storms, Spark, Lightning, Conductivity, the number just keeps climbing. So you can use this to cheese really high damage on bosses. This will probably get nerfed, but it is about the same relative power to Controlled Destruction, because as long as you're just pressing like 2 buttons every once in a while, you'll have 24% increased damage all the time. And Controlled Destruction gives you 30% increased damage, but it makes it so you can't do crits. but Spark has an inherent crit chance of 9%, which is effectively 9% damage, because crit damage multiplier is 100% by default. Also, gaining access to crit lets you just put in 1 point here, which is 40% increased damage almost all the time. Because Spark has so many projectiles, you'll just straight up be critting all the time. 40% increased elemental damage. With my current total additive being 386, this is about a 11% damage increase with this node here. However, it does come at the cost of having to spec these cast speed nodes. Get into the skill tree in a second. Another thing that I want to cover is mana. Mana regeneration is kind of a pain in the ass, and I've kind of walked back my take on Mind Over Matter now that I've been doing like consistently T17 maps with juiced up breaches and stuff. Not having Mind Over Matter was kind of rough, and there's also these maps where there's burning ground on the ground, and it's super freaking annoying with Energy Shield. And sometimes you just want to be able to play the game and not like laser focus in all the time, not worry about dying. I want to be able to stand in on-death explosions and detonate deads and stuff and not freak out and think I'm going to lose my map. So playing Mind Over Matter is very, very good for that because it just gives you way more effective HP. The problem is that it halves your mana recovery rate. So what are some ways that you can tackle dealing with the massive loss of mana regen? There's a lot of mana regen on the skill tree, of course. Getting something like Ether Flow is just 50% increase, which is kind of mandatory. And there's also optional like mana regen nodes here. You could go into here. If this is giving you a problem, you could swap out these energy shield nodes and instead path up this way to get more mana regen. There's a mana regen cluster right here. But one thing that I found to be extremely good, and there's this is kind of twofold, you can get a ton of mana regen on your gear, of course. You can get mana regen implicit on your chest piece. You can get mana regen on suffixes on rings, and you can get mana regen on suffix on your focus and your wand. But one thing that I found to be extremely good is getting at least one item with gain mana per enemy killed. This is a new ring that I got, and I got it because of the rarity, and I found, if you don't know, getting rarity of items found is pretty good when you're mapping. I have it on my helmet and both of my rings, but I swapped to this, and I wanted to get one with mana per enemy killed while using Mind Over Matter just to see how it felt. Having this on basically made my mapping go from, if I kill an enemy, now I just go right back to full mana, versus I'm constantly draining mana. And having mana per enemy killed while mapping is extremely good, because even if you drain all your energy shield, as long as you're killing enemies, you can still hold down right click and sustain what is effectively your new life. So that is extremely good. And if you pair that with a % mana on kill gem, or jewel rather, it kind of has the same effect of this, but I found the mana per enemy killed to be a little bit more effective. I don't think this number scales, but it is possible that this is scaling off of mana recovery rate, because you'd think 30 mana per enemy killed isn't crazy, but if you're killing 10 enemies a second, that's 300 mana all the time, and anecdotally it just felt crazy. You can get mana per enemy killed on rings, and you can also get it on your wand, but you can also get increased mana regen on your wand. Same thing on the rings, so you can kind of pick and choose there. Or you can put multiple jewels on with recover enemy percentage of mana on kill, and I usually use that right here instead of this one. Also keep in mind that the more flat mana that you get, the more mana recovery you're going to have. Honestly, my mana recovery is pretty dog ass. I only have 600 right now, but that's because my total mana could be a bit better, and I don't have the crazy mana regen rolls that you can get on like your rings and your focus. But just to quickly demonstrate how important getting maximum mana is, if I lose this chest right here, I'm going to lose 50% regen, so that's important, right? But I go from 3,900 mana to just 3.1k, and my mana recov went all the way down to 396. So from 396 to 600. And that's mainly because the increase in mana that you're getting is going to drastically increase Force of Will effect. So generally, I would say Mind Over Matter is worth it if you're able to get some pretty good mana regen and you are taking advantage of mana on kill, at least in like one gem or one piece of gear, then I'd say it feels really good. With very good gear, you can get up to like 1.5k mana regen per second, and then you don't need the mana on kill, but not everybody has like perfect gear, right? You can also put Font of Mana in your Orb of Storms, which is another 40% increased mana regen, which is pretty good. Now let's talk about some ways that you can increase your damage and also shock versus lightning exposure. You can apply lightning exposure with Orb of Storms, and I got a lot of comments of people saying my Orb of Storms doesn't apply lightning exposure very much. That's because it's only going to apply the exposure when it actually shocks, so using conduction is pretty good to increase the chance to shock. And also, leveling this up, the more damage that this does, the more chance of shock that it's going to have. But honestly, on elites, yeah, a lot of the time it isn't going to proc, but we aren't entirely reliant on our exposure. I would say this is mainly for just high health elites, or bosses is where this is particularly useful. I tried Ball Lightning to apply exposure more because it has the 750% more chance to shock, but I didn't see more success with this. However, when the new patch comes, this won't exist anymore, so maybe the shock is a little bit more consistent. If you guys have any recommendations for applying lightning exposure more consistently, let me know down in the comments. A lot of people have been talking about using Elemental Storm and then using this for exposure because this is going to instantly apply any exposure that you have. But for it to be good, it is basically a 4-point investment on your Ascendancy tree, and it comes at the loss of not using Strike twice. And then you'd want to build way more into exposure stuff. And there just isn't as much exposure effect on the tree as there is shock magnitude. And if you go into the exposure, you lose the effect to apply 2 shocks simultaneously. Applying 2 shocks simultaneously is extremely good because there is a lot of shock magnitude on the tree. So 20% increased shock magnitude increases the value of 20% by default. So it goes from 20% of 20% is 4%. So then you would get, so then by virtue of having 2 shocks, this one node is giving you 8% multiplicative damage. And you have shock applied on mobs like crazy often, especially if you spec into this node. It gives you a 30% increased chance to afflict ailments. But these nodes over here give you 10%, 20%, 30%, and then 50% adding when you add all of it up. And this is also giving you some mana regen, so it's kind of a 2-for-1. And then you get the 30% here, and then you get a 25% here. And now we're at a point where our shock is applying 41% damage increase to the enemy twice. And exposure just can't get that high. My exposure is at 52%, and you can scale it up a bit more. But one thing that you can also do with shock is that you can get 20% shock magnitude on a jewel. And that, I think, is going to outscale effect duration, because effect duration is very good for Spark, but it's mainly only good for bossing or like doing expedition or ritual altars. Duration is very good for Spark, but you almost instantly apply shock, and this is just straight up a multiplicative damage increase. If you get a 20% increase, that's 4% on both of your shocks, so an 8% damage increase on just one gem. And you can get, I'm pretty sure, yeah, it's a suffix, you can get skill effect duration and magnitude of shock on the same gem. And you can still, because the energy shield stuff is prefixes, you can get increased maximum energy shield recharge rate, or energy shield faster start, and skill effect duration, and magnitude of shock. That's probably like a 100 exalt jewel, but you can see why shock is so powerful. And when you're just mapping, you're going to very easily apply shock, especially if you're using increased chance to inflict ailments. But it's based on your damage. So if you have more cast speed and you're doing more damage with your Spark, your shocks are going to apply pretty much instantaneously. And if you just run around mapping, you'll see that you are applying it very easily. Also, if you take the Elemental Storm route, you don't have the points to get another 20% increased exposure. So you're like playing an exposure build, but not speccing into one of the best exposure nodes in the game. And this is mainly good for bossing, but if you wanted more survivability, hey, you could just go into Heart of the Storm. So that is my take on that. You could use just 2 points into Elemental Storm to get it, and then put the Lightning Exposure gem on that, but then you lose a little bit of boss damage, but it might help with your clear. So I might mess around with that, but this is also a little bit crit reliant, and I'm already stressed for skill points. I don't want to spec into anything crit related because it's not going to help the build, and later on, we're not going to be using Rising Tempest. Once they fix this, we'll just go back to Controlled Destruction. So in my opinion, Shock is just straight up better than Exposure, but they are not mutually exclusive. Shock is just straight up, in my opinion, better for overall mapping, and then if you want to spec into a little bit of Exposure, like here, or like down here, you can do that with pretty low investment, and then anytime you find an elite, throw down an Orb of Storms on it, or a boss. The boss will pretty much always have Exposure, so that's why I spec into it, but I kind of kill bosses instantly anyways, so feel free to pick and choose what you want to do there. Since we're looking at the skill tree figure, I'll just go over where I'm at currently. I decided to, again, go for this Exposure here because our resistances are going to be solved once the patch comes out, and Shock twice, or Strike twice rather, is extremely good. This recoup is garbage in my opinion. And then when I do like Pinnacle bosses, I swap to a little bit more mana regen so that Mind Over Matter is a bit more consistent because my mana regen is a little crappy on bosses. So I swap out of this cast speed and I go into this mana regen. And if your mana feels really bad, just swap out of cast speed because cast speed is going to drain your mana quicker, and then you can spec into more mana regen. I went into all this magnitude stuff, which is nice, and I like that it has mana regen. If I wanted more survivability, I could even get even more mana regen and energy shield here, and these points are pretty good, in which case I would swap out of a bit of damage that I have right up here. I really like these nodes for mapping because this is 60% additive damage in total, which is about a 16% damage increase for me currently, with me having under 400% additive, but also it increases my chance to apply ailments via shock against rares. So rares are pretty much always double shocked, which I found to be very, very good. I have some energy shield up here so that I can hit this jewel. I have the skill effect duration, which is pretty nice. This energy shield gives you also mana, so I quite like that. And then I spec'd out of this energy shield recharge rate, but I still have it down here. When you're using Mind Over Matter, energy shield recharge is not as important because honestly, most of our survivability is the mana, and the energy shield is kind of just to be able to tank really big hits or to not have to worry about it that much. So you could even make an argument to swap out of this stuff entirely and to go into higher energy shield base, or just get more damage in the form of like cast speed or something. I really, really like this cast speed node here, so I might go for that at some point, because 4 points, but 16% increased cast speed if you've dealt a crit, and since we're not using Controlled Destruction anymore, this is a really good node. Of course, I have the Arcane Surge stuff, jewels, some more energy shield. If you want more max, you could go here. And then I went up here, get all this stuff, and I like the magnitude of shock, energy shield stuff, mana stuff. This is pretty much mandatory if you play Mind Over Matter, in my opinion. And then, of course, we have the projectile speed and skill duration. If you're just mapping, you could make an argument that skill duration isn't super insane. If you wanted to, you could probably spec out of some of it and then go for raw damage, such as cast speed, or juicing up your mana a little bit more. There is a bit of an argument to be made for that, but for bossing and high health mobs, duration is really good. My duration is at 6.22 seconds. You could maybe make an argument to take, persistence out for the same reason, and using mobility is pretty nice too, to just fly through maps. That's where I'm at with the skill tree. A lot of stuff is interchangeable, so feel free to just do whatever you want. As long as it works for you, then it works for you. Another thing that I figured I would just slam into this video is weapon swap tech. So there's a few ways that you can take advantage of this. One of the most easy ways is using a Sigil of Power staff. This gives you a pretty huge damage increase. I've covered it many times, but if you put it down, it just gives you a big damage increase based on how much mana you spend. So you see my stacks go up here as much as I spend mana. If you put down like Mana Tempest or something, it'll pretty much instantly proc to max, or if you're just like holding down right click. And it gives you 14% increased damage per stage up to 4 times, so 56% damage increase. Pretty crazy. One thing that you want on this staff is cast speed and maximum mana if possible. I could just tap this to probably get mana or something. Full damage. Okay, well, I got scammed, but let's hit it with an Exalt. Spell damage, that's not mana. Exalt again? Exalt again? Okay. Oh, I wanted to vowel this magnitude because I like this. Let's see if it hits anything good. 10 to strength, yo. Insane. Okay, anyways. Ideally, you'd have mana on this so that when you swap to it, you don't lose energy shield, because you can see that if I swap to mine, I lose a bit of energy shield and mana. Not a big deal, though. You want the cast speed so that it casts Sigil of Power faster, but you also want to bind conductivity to this weapon, and I'll show you guys how you can do that. You want to go into your skill tree. Super freaking annoying the first time you do it, so I will walk you through how to do it. This will take a second. So what you want to do is refund up to 24 skill points. I guess before I show you how to do it, let's talk about why you want to do it. I unspec'd a bunch of my points. So basically, what is going to end up happening is you're going to bind your conductivity to your weapon swap 2 by clicking this button, and anytime that you press conductivity, it will automatically swap to your second weapon. The reason that you want to do this is that there's a bunch of nodes on the skill tree for curses. If you look up curse, this is going to give you increased curse effect and curse duration. And if we increase the effectiveness of our conductivity, it's going to increase how much lightning resistance it's going to reduce on the mob. If we see here on this boss kill, by doing this, I put down conductivity, and I'm reducing the mob's lightning resistance by 65%. So if any mob in the game is lightning resist, you just take this off. But also this goes into the negative and works with exposure. So this is a huge damage increase. So what you want to do, and I think this is kind of unintuitive, I think GGG should fix how you actually have to do this because it ends up being a huge pain in the ass, but you want to free up 24 skill points in total, and you basically bind certain skill points to Weapon Sweat 1, and then bind other ones to weapon set 2. The ones that you want to bind for weapon set 1 ideally are ones that are only damage related, nothing to do with energy shield, because you don't want to just delete your energy shield when you swap weapons. So you want to do stuff that is damage related. So what I would recommend doing is you basically go in here and you want to give yourself 24 skill points. So these lightning nodes you will never take off under any circumstance. So ideally do this, get rid of these lightning nodes, get rid of some of these mana nodes here, get rid of the arcane surge nodes right here, these ones. Get rid of the elemental effect ones if you're spec'd into it, get rid of skill effect duration, get rid of skill effect duration up here, and projectile speed. And then if you happen to spec into it, get rid of these nodes. That's what you want to do. Now, this is what it's going to look like. I have way more skill points than I should, but that's because I'm going to set it up in a way that's a little bit more ideal. Because what happens if you spec points that you're swapping out of constantly, and then it's set to a certain weapon set, putting points in of normal skill points that are not the weapon set, like it disallows you from putting the points in, and it's super freaking annoying. So I'll just show you how to do it in a way that isn't going to be annoying. So we freed up 24 weapon set points. Now what do we want to do? We want to click weapon set 2, and now we want to just spec all the curse crap. So curse duration, curse duration, curse duration, curse effect, and then we go down here, int. I'll put this in this planner, by the way. God damn it, I meant to click int. Int, effect, 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 effect. So now I have all that curse effect stuff. And then we want to go down here. So int, curse effect, or curse duration, and then this gives us huge curse duration, and enemies cursed can't recharge energy shield and have reduced life regen. And then we go down here, int, curse effect, faster curse activation effect, and we can get those two. If you have jewels that have curse effect, you can put it right here. You can, rather than specking down here and going to these nodes, you could activate this one and get a curse effect jewel, and also activate this for another curse effect jewel. I think you can get curse effect and duration in the same socket, so that would be slightly better than these two nodes, but if you don't want to spend money on a jewel, that is what you do. So now we have 24 points allocated for this set. So now, anytime that we swap to our second weapon, we're going to have access to all of these. But now we have to spec our points for our first weapon. So we want to put it into damage stuff that we are never going to change under any circumstance, because then you don't have to deal with it anymore. So we're going to go into these nodes. You will always want these nodes no matter what. You'll always want these two nodes no matter what. You'll always want spell damage and projectile speed no matter what. You'll always want the arcane surge nodes no matter what. At this point, I'm pretty confident in the shock stuff, so I'll say you will always want the shock magnitude no matter what. And what are some other things that are like pretty mandatory? I'd say the skill duration is probably pretty mandatory there and up here. So then, now we don't ever have to worry about, unless you want to unallocate these, and those are pretty easy to deal with. Anytime you want to like swap your skill points, this won't be in your way. What ends up happening is if you wanted to unallocate this point, but then you spent your weapon set point somewhere else, and then you wanted to use a normal skill point, the game won't let you. It says requirements not met. That's why you want to spec into things that like you'll use almost no matter what, and then it can be really annoying. I'm going to reallocate my points later, but just wanted to demonstrate how to do that. Now, what you want to do is go into your skill gems, and then you want to, on every individual skill, select which weapon it's on. So sigil power is automatically on weapon 2, spark put on weapon 1, flame wall weapon 1, lightning conduit if you're using it weapon 1 only, and then just basically unclick weapon 2. Archmage weapon 1, and then conductivity, because it's our curse, put that on weapon 2. So anytime you press it, boom, automatically takes a staff out. Orb of Storms weapon 1, ball lightning, I was messing around with this, mana tempest weapon 1, and then another thing that you can do is you can grab yourself blink, and then you can put blink on weapon 2, and then disable Archmage on weapon 2, and only have it on weapon 1. So then if you manually press the weapon swap keybind, which is X, you can also rebind this, but if you manually swap X and then press spacebar, you will gain access to blink almost for free, which is very nice when you're mapping for just a bit more mobility. You can also use this with any other spirit thing you want, probably. Use like Blasphemy Enfeeble, so that you can just instantly apply Enfeeble to enemies, and then it would have a drastically huge curse duration, or curse effect rather, but if you wanted to use both curses, then you'd have to spec into this node to where you can apply an additional curse, but you could just put that on weapon set 2. There's a lot of options here, But that is just the general gist of how to take advantage of the weapon swap tech, which is pretty good for damage. That's going to be it for the video. If you want to see my gear, I'll give a quick overview. The only thing that I have improved lately is I got a new wand. I might vow this, but this was like 100 exalts. I mainly got it because it had an extra level of spell skills, it had more mana, and it had more cast speed, and the mana regen on it was very nice. My helmet is the same, focus the same, chest the same, boots the same, belt the same, all pretty bad. And then I swapped to new rings to get more magic find. So I lost some cast speed, which kind of sucks, and cast speed drastically inflates your numbers. If you want to see just on my spark right here, keep in mind I'm still missing 14 skill points, but it's at 16,963. I take this off, it goes down by 2,000. So yeah, there's a lot of max mana on here, but same difference. But I mainly just wanted rings with rarity on them, and I can get even better rings once the resistance change comes in, because I won't need them to be prismatic anymore. So that'll be pretty nice, and I can get rings with better mana, better cast speed, better mana regeneration. So I'm excited for that. That's pretty much all I've changed with the build. If you guys want to donate gear, I'm in the need of a new chest, a new focus, a new helmet. I've gotten some drops, I've gotten drops with high energy shield. You can get a focus with like 300 energy shield on it. Same thing can be said for a chest without quality on them too, which is pretty insane. Missing just so much energy shield and so much mana right now. But I will keep on grinding. Anyways, that's it for the video. Oh, one thing I guess I can talk about is anoints. A lot of people ask, what should I anoint? Currently, I have Piercing Shot anointed because it's very cheap, and if your build kind of sucks, this really helps out with your clear. If you don't have that, or if you are for some reason rich, you can go into Lucky Lightning, which is probably one of the next upgrades I'll try to do. It's all the way the hell down here. Lightning damage with non-critical hits is lucky. I don't know the math on this, but I just know that it basically makes it do a significant amount of extra damage. However, these are very expensive. If you wanted a more defensive option, there's a lot of like random energy shield crap that you can go into. You do this stun threshold node down here if you don't like getting stunned, to give you additional stun threshold, basically 40%. And there's also some freeze threshold down over right here, Icebreaker. I don't use this because I use a freeze charm, but if you wanted to use like a stun charm instead, then you could anoint this. And this is pretty cheap to anoint, I'm pretty sure. If you guys have any other anoint recommendations, feel free to leave it down in the comments. I haven't looked too much into it. I quite like just having Pierce because I think it's good for clear, but I'll probably swap this to Lucky Lightning because I want to do a little bit more damage. That's it for the video. Thanks for watching. I'll make a fully updated build guide at some point. Yeah, peace.